The people who made Tornado Cash said this was built for privacy. In this new world of ubiquitous surveillance and cryptocurrency, we need privacy. So that's what we built this tool for. And if money laundering is a consequence of that, actually that's something that we can live with. Posing on his private jet and with his fleet of expensive cars. By day, by night, he's laundering money for the North Koreans, millions and millions of dollars of it.
Has there been a response? Have people in the tech industry read the book?
The chief executive of Binance, CZ, when my last book came out, actually recommended it as his book of the year and said, you should read Lazarus Heist. If you're interested in crypto, you should be interested in crypto crime. Was subsequently, of course, convicted of money laundering offences in the US.
Welcome to Underworlds from the Global Initiative Against Transnational Organized Crime. My name is Mark Shaw. In today's episode, I speak to Jeff White about his recent book called Rinsed. And Rinsed is about the connection between money laundering and advances in technology, most notably crypto, but also fintech and many others. And Jeff explores the explosion of the movement of illicit money linked to advances in technology, how this undercuts economies and development and is overwhelming authorities in some parts of the world. He really has thought deeply about the phenomenon of money laundering in the modern era and how we can do more to respond to it. It's a fascinating read. Jeff, welcome to the show. It's really good to have you here. If we can start off, what's the central theme of the book in a couple of sentences? What was driving your thinking? What was the main message that you wanted to bring across?
Well, yeah, thanks for having me. The book obviously looks at technology and money laundering. And I've covered tech as a journalist for a long time. I sort of reversed into the money laundering piece. Some of your viewers and listeners might know I've done a lot of work around North Korea and North Korean computer hacking. North Korea is an interesting case from a cybercrime point of view because whilst they're doing the same kind of things a lot of computer hackers are doing for governments, breaking into places and stealing information. These are government hackers working for the North Korean government. We have those in the UK and they're in the US. Every major country has its government hackers who hack for data and informational advantage. North Korea's hackers are accused of hacking for cash to support the regime, which is obviously under international sanctions. And so by looking at North Korea, on the one hand, you're looking at a sort of nation-state sanctions evasion type thing. On the other hand, you could also look at it as being an organized crime enterprise who do what all major organized crime enterprises do when they steal money. They launder it. And they're laundering it through some really high-tech means. So I started getting interested in this idea of how technology is used to launder money. And of course, the more I looked at that, the more influence I found technology having in laundering money for everything from cartel drug dealing to child sexual abuse.
Jeff, it's an amazing book, partly because it covers so much ground. So it's got example after example, and I'm going to go through some of those with you. But it's this, in a sense, after reading it, I was taken back by the wide front of developments. You also cover quite a lot of historical material. You outline 4 attributes near the end, near the conclusion, which you think money launderers need and that tech brings. Don't you want to quickly go through those 4 and we can then begin the conversation around some of the other details?
Sure, yeah. One of the interesting things about writing a book is when you start writing a book, you think you know what it's about. And it's usually only after you've finished it that you go back and went, oh, that's what I was writing about. And I started thinking towards the end, why? Why is technology just this constant source of new avenues for money launderers? And I started thinking, well, okay, what are you looking for as a money launderer? What do you want? Well, you want somewhere where there's lots of money floating about, big volumes floating about. So that you can stick your money in and it's not conspicuous. If I turn up with $1 million of drug money to a tiny casino, that's going to stand out. But if I go to a big casino with $1 million, it's going to fit in. So you're looking for a big, noisy environment. And you're also looking for asset prices in that environment that are very flexible. So, I can spend big money on a particular thing and no one will say, hang on, why are you turning up buying that thing for all of that money? You want this big, febrile marketplace. You also want international, because as a money launderer, I want to drop my money in Los Angeles and withdraw it in London or vice versa. So you give it international. And the other thing you're looking for is a lack of regulation. You don't want cops, regulators sniffing around. You want somewhere that's in the margins, at the grey areas of finance. So that's what you're after. If you look at what techies want, and particularly tech startups want, well, a febrile marketplace where there's loads of value sloshing around. That's all of the big sort of innovations in tech. If you look at Airbnb and Uber, even OnlyFans, NFTs, you have these crazy marketplaces with loads of volume and loads of movement in the asset prices. Good news for a money launderer. International, again, a tech startup wants to scale internationally. They want their app to be available everywhere in the world simultaneously. So international, an international movement of funds, something they're after. And also, as a tech startups tend to go where there's not much regulation. Again, something like Uber is the perfect example, Airbnb, areas where regulation is slightly confusing. That's where tech startups will go. So it's not that techies want to create good money laundering avenues for crooks. It's just the kind of things techies want to do in the areas of the world they move in turn out to be exactly the kind of places that have got big advantages for money launderers. So that's what I concluded at the end of the book, I guess.
Jeff, that's a really good overview. I mean, you obviously spoke to a lot of people in the tech industry, and you say in your explanation now, techies don't necessarily want to ease the way for money launderers, but is there an awareness amongst people in the sector that that's been the result? And do people think about that when you were raising it, writing your book? Were people surprised?
I think there is a general blindness in the tech industry towards negative outcomes. Psychologically, in terms of the psychodrama, if you like, of tech, I mean, it's full of people who believe in a vision of the future that tech is going to revolutionize. Eric Schmidt, by the way, of Google is a sort of arch example of this. One of his books that I read, every problem in the world, the solution was just more tech and ideally more Google. So you've got this bunch of people who believe the world can be better. And if you just apply tech, it'll all be much better, ideally my tech. The idea that that could be abused and misused just isn't something they really want to hear. And I can understand that. Who does want to hear that their invention has massive downsides? And let's face it, investors who fund the tech industry don't particularly want to be told about the downsides. There's a general sort of blind spot towards how stuff can be abused. So, the idea that somebody could use your platform for money laundering just often doesn't occur to techies. They think, well, and it's interesting because the techies sometimes are designing stuff that doesn't immediately seem like it would be used by money laundering. One of the examples I pointed to in the book is Call of Duty, an amazing video game that's very, very popular, hugely popular video game. At one point, Call of Duty's entire marketplace was taken over by criminals using it for laundering money, because they realized this was a store of value. Call of Duty's designers probably didn't think they were running, a financial institution, but the criminals looked at this and thought, we can move value from one place to another using that marketplace, and that's what we'll do. So again, the techies sometimes don't feel like what they're working on is a financial marketplace or has anything to do with finance, so why would money laundering be a problem? And the third thing I'd say is there are some techies for whom privacy trumps money laundering. One of the most amazing examples in the book is this mixer, this cryptocurrency mixer, Tornado Cash, that would take crypto in and mix it with others and then pump it out to a fresh wallet address. Money laundering, yes. But the people who made Tornado Cash said this was built for privacy. In this new world of ubiquitous surveillance and cryptocurrency, we need privacy. So that's what we built this tool for. And if money laundering is a consequence of that, actually that's something that we can live with. So for all of these reasons, tech ends up responding to money laundering in this really interesting way.
Jeff, I was fascinated by this idea that Tornado Cash, just to come there and skip into some of the details in the second half of the book, Tornado Cash is an autonomous platform, so nobody is controlling it, right? So it provides absolute privacy, but it provides then a vehicle, obviously for licit, but also illicit activity, and was used in perhaps the greatest, you outline it as the greatest heist, perhaps the biggest robbery in history in terms of just sheer volume of stolen cash. Tell us about it.
Yeah, this is a fascinating case, and just to throw ahead, has been superseded by another crime quite recently. But let's look at this one first of all. This is a video game, based in Southeast Asia called Axie Infinity. It was huge in Southeast Asia, quite popular around the world as well. I meet people every now and again who've played this game. Loads of money sloshing around in this game. And again, the video game designers probably don't think that they're a financial institution. They just think they're designing a video game and it happens to have an in-game marketplace.
And Jeff, the players are, sorry to interrupt, the players, you outline a kind of Filipino guy. So the players are often people with not many resources. They've put in just a small amount of money. I don't know if is that the case generally, or there's a huge range of people that are putting finance or were putting finance into the system.
Yeah, Axie Infinity was a really interesting game because it's not the first one to do this, but the idea was that when I bought video games when I was a kid, you buy the game and you play the game, and that was how it worked. These days, the game is free, but you buy assets, players, stuff that you use in the game. So you download the game for free, but to play it, you need to buy, in this case, axes for these little characters that you played with. Now, what was interesting was you buy these characters, you'd play them in the game, and the characters would increase in value, and you could sell your characters to another player. Now, obviously, you're selling them for in-game tokens, which doesn't sound like real money, but you could change those in-game tokens into cryptocurrency and then into real money. So actually, if you played this game and did well at it, you could actually earn a living. You could earn real, fiat money, pounds, dollars, euros, pesos in the Philippines. And yeah, this became hugely popular in the Philippines. This was also during lockdown, so people struggled for work. And there were news stories about people who were playing this video game full-time as a career. And of course, that created a hype cycle. It was also connected with crypto, so there's a crypto hype cycle. So this game just went through the roof. 2022, hackers believed to work for the North Korean government, the famed Lazarus group of hackers, break in, manipulate the systems, and steal something like $625 million worth of crypto from the game. It's a vast sum of money. When they wanted to launder that money, they hit upon this thing, Tornado Cash, which we just talked about, this crypto mixer where you could put crypto in and it would mix it with everybody else's and then spit it out to a fresh wallet address. Something like 450 million of the stolen money went into Tornado Cash, stayed there for a few weeks, and then it's just vanished. We've just lost it. The developers of Tornado Cash said, well, hang on, we're not responsible for Tornado Cash. We built it, we put it on the internet, and then we destroyed our passwords effectively. They said we don't have access to it anymore. It's just code running on the internet that we don't administer. It's administered by the users. We've effectively created this autonomous system where the users control the code and we, the developers, have nothing to do with it anymore. It's a true democratic system. And they had, again, this visionary idea that Tornado Cash was going to be this. Things like Tornado Cash in the future would be how we'd run society, true, genuine democracy. Of course, the downside of that is that the North Koreans came to Tornado Cash and managed to wash something like $500 million of money. The Tornado Cash developers have been charged. One of them's been convicted, is appealing. Another one is going to be on trial in the US in April, so the trial is imminent on that. Tornado Cash is like the most amazing case. If you had to conjure up a case that involved the acid test of privacy, like what would you do for privacy? Would you launder $500 million for the North Koreans? This case is incredible. And at the heart of it has this idea that in the future, technology will be autonomous, democratically controlled technology. It's got everything in it, the Tornado Cash case. It's astonishing.
It is. And I must say, Jeff, this part of the book is really interesting because you're drawing to a close after covering a lot of different areas. And then the Tornado Cash example, I was really taken by, and you've covered it really well. Earlier in the book, there's 2 chapters which actually have a kind of warning on them on child sexual exploitation on the internet. It's something that we as an initiative have covered, and there are people working on it. It's truly horrendous, as you outline, and you've talked to people who've been exploited and abused. I mean, tell us something about that. Firstly, your own response to it. Secondly, the sense it's not only tech. I mean, there's quite a lot of interesting points that this generated massive advertising revenue for platforms that were offering, well, this sort of advert was subsidizing the general platform. I mean, and this was a sort of key development, if you like, in the movement of money in lots of individuals paying for things. Give us some background on both of these chapters and the examples you use.
Yes, correct. So these are 2 chapters which deal with the issue of child sexual abuse. I'll be honest, I did not want to put those chapters at that point in the book. I think it is important to address, but it's sort of chapters 3 and 4, I think. And some people have said it's a heavy read. It does make the case that money laundering enables some very, very serious activity. I think people have this idea of money laundering as being this kind of thing that people do with spreadsheets and bank accounts. At the heart of it is people who suffer, and in this case suffer some of the worst consequences. Looked at 2 examples. One was a website called Backpage. Backpage was like Craigslist, basically, an advertising site. Interestingly, Backpage didn't charge for general advertising, but for adult services, it did charge. And these were sometimes things like massage services and that kind of thing, shady, but a bit dubious. But Some of it was, frankly, sex trafficking. It was prostitution, and it was people who've been trafficked into prostitution, because there is this distinction, which is an uncomfortable one, between what you might call voluntary prostitution and people who've been trafficked into prostitution. There's a whole debate around that. But some of the people who were being offered on these sites were underage. They have not chosen, they cannot choose this career. They are trafficked into it and forced into it. Backpage was making scads of money out of this and did not want to stop that money. Backpage's defense was that they are a platform, and there is freedom of speech allowed on a platform, and that's part of the deal. You know, you accept freedom of speech, or accept freedom of speech for pimps and prostitutes. Again, debates around that. Now, the US government went after Backpage again and again and again. And actually, Kamala Harris, who was obviously defeated in the presidential election, went after Backpage in 2 really big cases and lost, because the US government, US judges in the US said, we have freedom of speech. This is a platform that you cannot, you know, what they're doing may be unpalatable to you, but you can't stop it. And then they hit on money laundering. This site is making money out of criminal behavior, effectively. The advertisers who advertise prostitution and trafficking services are paying for the advertising, and Backpage is making a profit. Let's go after the money and money laundering. And that was successful. Backpage was prosecuted. Its founders were prosecuted. One of them committed suicide in the run-up to the case, sadly. But the other person was convicted on 1 count, and 1 count alone, and it was money laundering. It's sort of like the Al Capone thing, where you get them on the money laundering. That then led into another chapter in the book, which is about an even worse case of a dark website that was set up that catered entirely to child sexual abuse. And what was interesting with that was Backpage had flirted with cryptocurrency to try and disguise the flows of money. This dark website just went full crypto. All the payments were in crypto, and they believed that would create anonymity and protect them. In the end, though, it led investigators right to the door of the man. It was one individual, one guy in Korea, who was running the entire site. And again, the good outcome is he was convicted. There's some controversy around how that conviction worked out in Korea. But these, 2 really impactful cases, and at the heart of them, what really led to it was the money laundering trail, was that flow of money, which was, I thought was a really interesting, useful point and a good point to make in terms of the investigations.
Jeff, you say you didn't want to put the chapters so early. I have to say that the chapters are excellent, and they pull the reader along, and they have shock value, of course, and it's clear what the harm and the damage is to wider society and to individuals. Did you, or have you, got any feedback, just to come back to this idea that tech has unintended harm, whatever? Has there been a response? Have people in the tech industry read the book and have come away or drawn conclusions or communicated with you around that?
Not that they've told me. In marketing the book, one of the audiences I was keen to reach out to was the cryptocurrency audience, the crypto asset audience. There are obviously lots of conferences you can go and speak out on podcasts. It did not get a lot of interest from that community of people. Again, I think the idea that your technology has a downside and that it's going to be abused just isn't really a very popular message among techies. And actually, one of the ironic things I should point out is that there's a crypto exchange called Binance, which I'm sure many of your listeners and viewers will be familiar with. Crypto exchange, you can take your pounds and dollars there and change them into Bitcoin or whatever. The chief executive of Binance, CZ, when my last book came out, actually recommended it as his book of the year and said, you should read Lazarus Heist. If you're interested in crypto, you should be interested in crypto crime. Was subsequently, of course, convicted of money laundering offenses in the US. So in terms of how the tech industry's reacted to my work, I guess that tells the whole story, maybe.
Jeff, what's, talking about crypto, and crypto is it's a thread running through different parts of the book. What's changing now? Trump administration, the sense that there may be policy changes or support in the US. I mean, what's your take on the debate as it unfolds, and the link to the illicit economy more broadly?
Yeah, it's interesting. I'm not one of those people who says crypto is just bad. Why on earth would we have crypto? It's all criminal. And there are people who say that and just say, well, this is a basket case, in financial sector. I think there are useful cases for cryptocurrency. And look, even if you have a dim view of it, one thing you can say about Bitcoin is that I read its obituary every year for the first 10 years of Bitcoin's existence, and it's survived. Now, for piece of technology that was created by a group of non-professionals, if you like, certainly not working in any of the big institutions, and was just put out on the internet as a sort of test. Bitcoin has proved remarkably resilient and incredibly disruptive. You know, probably more. The last invention you could look at that did that was maybe credit cards, I suppose. It's an astonishing thing, and it is going to keep running. The US has had this really interesting approach to crypto. As far as I could work out under even the Biden administration and before, they didn't really know what crypto was. Is it a currency? Is it a commodity? Is it a security? And obviously that depends who regulates it. That question never got answered. So the US literally didn't know what crypto was. We now have this incoming administration that is very pro-crypto. The two significant figures at the heart of it, Donald Trump and Elon Musk, incredibly pro-crypto. I would say wildly pro-crypto. Sometimes I think there needs to be a bit more control over that. So basically the US government is, to the extent there was going to be regulation around crypto and to rein it in, I don't see a lot of that happening. You will see more infrastructure being set up around crypto, but infrastructure doesn't mean regulating it. You know, you can set up a marketplace, you can set up infrastructure, you can allow crypto to exist, and you can rein in regulation at the same time and limit regulation. I think that's what's going to happen. We already have seen the price of Bitcoin roughly double since Trump won the election last year. So, you know, immediately you see this go up. Prior to that, we had the launch of what's called a spot ETF for Bitcoin. So you can effectively trade Bitcoin in the same way you trade shares, you know, so people who own shares can also trade Bitcoin. I heard the other day a stat that about 1% of wealthy, sort of private wealthy, you know, what they call family offices, private wealth is now invested in crypto because they see it as a useful extra asset to invest in. You are going to see volumes of crypto go up. For a money launderer, that's really useful. The more volume there is, the more liquidity, the more I can hide in the flows. You know, when Bitcoin was quite small, it was fairly easy to spot where Bitcoin was moving. With Bitcoin exploding and more transactions, that's going to create more noise for the crooks to hide in. There's also been, of course, Tether, which is a stable coin, so it's linked to the value of the US dollar. That solves a huge headache for money launderers, which was Bitcoin's price volatility. You know, if you're laundering money for a drug dealer and they give you $1 million, you don't really want to turn around to the next day and say, oh, by the way, it's only worth 700,000 today. That's not a good message. So Tether solves that volatility issue. So we're starting to see Tether being massively exploited by money launderers simply because it solves that big problem for them. So there's lots of movements around crypto. The other thing I'd quickly point out is Tornado Cash was basically 3 dudes who invented some code and put it on the internet, and it laundered $500 million for the North Koreans is the allegation. A few people writing a few lines of code can upend this entire financial sector. That's astonishing. It's a remarkable thing, but also it makes it quite difficult to predict where it's going to go.
I must say, I took away from, and also the explanation now, how rapidly moving this all is, and how out of a kind of blind spot a new platform, a new tool arrives, and the whole process changes. The sense that actually we don't have a handle on this, at least for me, runs through the book. Jeff, is that true? You do outline some pretty courageous investigators, people who stuck on particular cases for long periods of time, were pushed back, moved forward, tried a different approach. I mean, is this just something now that we have to accept? I mean, we're a think tank covering lots of illicit markets, people looking at the impact and the harm of illicit markets. The sense now that actually we don't really control the movement of illicit finance, no matter what we say, no matter what people claim.
Yeah, I think there's a few maybe encouraging messages to put out there. You know, interesting as crypto is, and much as it gets the headlines, it is dwarfed by the size of the traditional economy. So if you're, you know, a criminal group, there is clearly going to be more money laundering in traditional finance than there is in crypto, simply because traditional finance is bigger. We don't know what proportion of crypto is illicit. Companies will tell you they know, but what they know is what proportion is illicit that they know about. There's a whole bunch of crypto that's illicit that they don't know about. So we don't know the percentages. But fundamentally, more laundering in traditional finance. So if you're still working in traditional finance, you don't know anything about crypto, keep going. You're doing a good job. You're still working in a good space. Traditional finance's exposure to crypto is going to increase. So the idea that you can sort of put crypto over there and just ignore it because, you know, you're looking at traditional finance, well, increasingly people are going to be using crypto. Crooks are increasingly using crypto. I think it's about 12% of UK adults, about 14% of US adults now own a crypto asset. So it's getting currency. And so those crypto waves are lapping at the shore of traditional finance. And if you're a crook and you do launder money and it is in crypto, there's a certain limit to what you can actually do with it when you want to actually turn it into the real world things that you want to enjoy. You can just about, I think, buy a Lamborghini in crypto, but there's not many places will offer that. Again, property bought in crypto, a few fringe services might offer that, but actually using this stuff in the real world is quite difficult. As a store of value and to move it around, crypto is great. But when you want to buy your floating gin palace, you're probably going to have to use normal traditional finance. So again, getting your crypto into traditional finance is one of the issues. There's on and off ramps. So again, for listeners and viewers, if they work in traditional finance, have an eye to crypto coming in and out. You don't necessarily understand crypto itself, but your crypto in and out exposure is important to look at. And the other thing I just mentioned as a positive is that one of the things about crypto that's really interesting is it gets stored. Even if you launder it, it's quite difficult to raise every trace. And we've had cases where people stole crypto, laundered it literally years ago. And the US government particularly has kept a track of that. And then years later, the crook thinks, oh, nobody's looking, I'm going to cash out my crypto. And that's when they get you. And there have been convictions. So even if people don't understand it all now, we can just archive the information, bank it, and save it for a time when we do understand it and when the crooks are actually trying to cash it out.
Jeff, thanks. That's interesting. I mean, really, and helpful, and actually a bit more optimistic around
Got to be optimistic.
the sense that there's billions of dollars of illicit money moving around and that there's less control around it. I want to turn to this to North Korea. I mean, this was your previous book. There's a fair amount of mention of North Korea in Rinst. What's going on? What are the North Koreans doing? I guess they're still at it.
Yes, correct. I'll be honest, I sort of thought I was going to leave the North Korean story behind. I sort of felt I'd done quite a lot on it and I wanted to move on. As you say, in Rinst, I talk about loads of other stuff, cartel drug dealing and, you know, people trafficking and fraud and all those other things. But the North Koreans just keep doing stuff. And there's an incentive there. And North Korea is largely sealed off from the international community and financially almost exclusively sealed off. They can't trade, they can't bank. How do you keep your country going when you can't do the stuff that countries do to make money? Well, the accusation is North Korea's government hackers are among those who are stealing money to support the North Korean regime. That's the accusation against the Lazarus Group, which again gets into this really interesting territory of on the one hand, it's a state threat. On the other hand, it's kind of organized crime, theft type stuff. And when I was writing the book, the Axie Infinity case, the theft of $625 million worth of crypto was the biggest, as far as I was concerned, it was the biggest crime ever. If you look at the single hit on one victim in one go, valued at the time of the theft, there's very little to compete with that. But I had real trouble convincing people. After the book was out, I said, you do realize that Axie Infinity theft was the biggest of all time? And people would sort of stroke their chins and say, oh, no, I don't think so. In the last month or so, we've had another raid, again, allegedly by North Korea, on a cryptocurrency exchange called Bybit, where they stole $1.5 billion worth of crypto. And finally, people are saying, oh my gosh, I think this is the biggest theft of all time. And of course, I'm saying, well, yes, they already had that, actually. They've now got the numbers 1 and 2 spots. And again, the laundering around that's been really interesting. Where do you take 1.5 billion of hot crypto and sell it? Who's on the other side of that trade? This is one of the remarkable things about North Korea. It's the world's oldest communist country, North Korea. Predates China's communism by a year. And yet North Korea is now engaged in very, very cutting edge financial engineering and massive market speculation in terms of trying to find a market match for their 1.5 billion of stolen currency.
If you may never be able to leave North Korea behind in terms of coverage, there's not that many experts working, at least in the area that you are. I mean, is that North Korea you continue to write stories on as a journalist?
Yes, I mean, as long as North Korea keep doing this stuff and as long as it keeps being interesting, which it is, we'll keep covering it. There's also a really interesting story around North Korean hackers, well, North Korean IT workers, some of whom are hackers, who've realized that hacking into a company is just one option. Another option is get a job at the company. Obviously, now we can work remotely, particularly software developers can get remote working jobs. So there's an entire edifice of, we're talking thousands of North Korean IT workers who are infiltrating companies, getting a job there under false pretenses, sometimes just working to get a salary. You know, that's useful enough if you're North Korean. It's a sanctioned country. You can send some money back to the regime and they'll like that. But you can also go further then, penetrate this company, infiltrate it, steal money, steal data. So there's this whole edifice that the North Koreans are doing around that, which we're looking into at the moment. Some really, really interesting stuff around that.
Can't wait to read it. Jeff, the other country you cover, which is a country I know well for a variety of reasons, is Nigeria. You cover it in the earlier section of the book as a sort of place of innovation. And actually, it's remarkable stuff. At least one of the things really remarkable for me was the display of wealth on the internet, people building up profiles in a sense that they are legitimate businessmen and women. But behind all of that is really quite remarkable criminal empires. Give us an example or two and your sense of covering that, getting interviews. I must say this chapters was really, really insightful.
Well, again, this links back to the North Korean stuff. The North Koreans, you know, accused of stealing all of this money, and then they obviously need to launder it somehow. I think we have this idea, or I had this idea of computer hackers when I started out, that they were sort of boy geniuses in hoodies who could just do everything with, you know, a few strokes of the keyboard. But actually, money laundering's a particular job. You need to know what you're doing. You need to know how international bank accounts work. You need ideally insiders within banks. You've got to know how the SWIFT system works. You've got to recruit money mules. Coders and techies like code because that's what they understand. They understand server architecture, malware. They understand virus analysis. They understand, you know, software vulnerabilities. Money laundering is a whole different set of skills. It's equally high tech, but it's a different set of skills. So often you'll find hackers will work with money launderers on the other side. And that's certainly the accusation against North Korea, that it's worked with these money launderers, one of whom turned out to be a Nigerian Instagram influencer called Hush Puppy. His real name is Ramon Abbas. He's living in Dubai. And yeah, it was this fascinating double life that he had, where on social media, where he had 2.3 million Instagram followers, he would sort of be flashing the cash in private jets and so on. All the way along, actually, there was reporting that he was involved in dubious activities and that, you know, he was actually a bit of a crook. But it sort of never touched him. It never sort of stuck to him. It's a bit, if you create a big enough tale, you can sort of outrun the negative press. I mean, Frank Abagnale, the star, the character in Catch Me If You Can, Frank Abagnale's story about what he did sort of got debunked as he was telling it, but he kind of outrun the debunking, and he developed this persona that was just larger than life, to the point where nobody really questioned the story anymore. And I think that's the idea, is if you can just outrun the doubters and the haters and the people who are actually exposing you and get big enough, you'll somehow be able to squash with your giant presence any sort of negative media. So anyway, Hush Puppy's posing on his private jet and with his fleet of expensive cars by day. By night, he's laundering money for the North Koreans, millions and millions of dollars of it, until it all went wrong and he got arrested in his glitzy Versace-themed hotel suite in Dubai. It's absolutely astonishing story. I don't know whether... I mean, look, social media is full of people who are faking it till they make it and showing off their wealth, and actually they don't own any of these cars. There's just loads of fakery on social media. There's quite a few stories I've covered around Nigerian folks who are doing this, Nigerian scammers who are doing this. But I just don't know whether that's because I've looked at Nigeria and I've sort of come across more of them. It's interesting. And it should be said that the vast majority of people in Nigeria have nothing to do with any of this, and actually have quite a dim view of the Nigerians who are involved in this, that, as I say, the tiny minority of the Nigerians who are involved in this kind of fraud.
Jeff, this idea of crypto traceability, you have lots of examples of companies tracing crypto assets. Does that mean that in the end we can win against this problem? I mean, we discussed earlier lots of illicit finance moving around, the growth of sort of global organized crime and the ability to move illicit assets. I mean, is there an upside to all of this at the end, do you think?
It's interesting. Cryptocurrency, as a lot of your listeners and viewers will know, is traceable. Almost all crypto moves across what's often a publicly viewable blockchain, a sort of public ledger of transactions. And so some will tell you, well, cryptocurrency is terrible for crime because, you know, you can see exactly where the money goes. There's a couple of things about that. Number one, tracing the money is not the same as getting it back. If I'm a victim of crime, I want my money back. You know, being able to trace the burglar as they run down the street with my television is not very good. I want my television back, thank you. So tracing it is different to freezing it and recovering it. It is possible to find instances where crypto's been traced and frozen and recovered. Big cases. I mean, there was an attack on a company called Colonial Pipeline a couple of years ago, big US oil distributor, attacked by believed to be Russian ransomware gang. They paid a ransom. The ransom was recovered and restored to Colonial Pipeline. Well, fact one, when the money went back to Colonial Pipeline, the Bitcoin was worth less than it was when they paid it, so they still lost money on the deal. But also, those examples, if you get to big examples like that, where the US government intervenes and the FBI gets involved, great. I can show you countless stories of individuals who've been scammed for what in government terms are small amounts of money, but for them are life-changing amounts of money. They will never see that money again. So the idea that this is all traceable means it's recoverable is not true. And secondly, if crypto was bad for crime, well, the criminals would probably have worked that out and stopped using it. As far as I'm aware, there's no slowdown in terms of criminals using crypto. So clearly what they've done is a calculation of how much of it gets recovered, how risky is it, how exposed am I? If that risk's worth taking, I'm going to still use crypto. Now, as I say, there are these cases where years after the crypto's cashed out, the enforcement authorities catch up with people and arrest them. So there's always that risk of you think it's safe now to use as a criminal, but in the future, will it be? But certainly the assessment for criminals has been, a large scale at the moment, crypto is still worth using. And there is now a vast global industry of people who are prepared to farm out stolen crypto to multiple sources all across the world, thousands and thousands of users making small amounts of money out of laundering it. And the idea is, it's not that you can't trace this, it's just that the effort of then tracing down each and every tiny bit of this across the thousands of wallets I've put it into is just computationally too difficult and logistically completely impossible. This is effectively technological smurfing. You put the money into loads and loads of avenues, and that's certainly the game at the moment. So I can't see any slowdown in crooks using crypto, to be honest.
So we're talking about crypto, this very hyper-modern form of transferring funds, to turn to a very old medium of transferring information, which is the book itself. And in the authors that we've spoken to, I think people are interested about your approach, how you ordered the material, where the idea came from, what were some of your frustrations in arranging the material. You've touched on this, you noted your frustration about 2 chapters early on. And give us a sort of inside, if necessary, frustrated view about producing the book, Jeff. Like, what were your thinking patterns? Is there stuff that you cut out? What do you think you could have done differently if you had to do it again?
I found it quite difficult to structure the book. I knew there was lots of money laundering stories, and I started getting these stories together. But then the question became, so how do you arrange that material? And what I try to do as an author, and what I think the authors of books that I've really enjoyed reading have done, is to make it so that you're going somewhere. There's a progression in the book, and as a reader, that's comforting, because it's like, oh, I'm going, I'm on the journey here. What's the next chapter going to be about? I need to read that because it leads on from this chapter. So I was trying to work out, like, what's the story here? What's the structure? And what I, in the end, hit upon was the sort of classic 3 stages of money laundering, which written about in books, and you study at university if you study illicit finance: placement, layering, and integration. Placement, get the money into a financial system. Layering, mix it around so you can't link the money back to the crime. Integration, pull it out and enjoy it, spend it on something. That's not a perfect methodology, and I think increasingly that 3-stage methodology struggles to fit. Placement, for example, when you were a cocaine dealer in the 1980s with loads of cash, placement was really difficult. You had to take that cash to a bank and convince them to put it in. You had to wash it through a front company. Placement, in modern crime, the money is often already in some kind of financial system. You're stealing from somebody's online banking. You're stealing from somebody's crypto wallet. So you're not having to, like, place the money into a financial system because it's already kind of there. So it wasn't a perfect methodology, but what it did allow me to do was to start with the classic cocaine cowboys era, Pablo Escobar money laundering case. Like, just start with, and there's a wonderful story about Pablo Escobar's nephew who discovers a rotting bag of Pablo's cash in his attic, which is just this wonderful image of, like, this is why you launder money, because if you don't, you have bin bags full of rotting cash in your house. You know, it's like, as a why launder money, it was a perfect starting point. And then you map out and you sort of go through these stages and you look at how technology is changing each of those stages. So that was sort of how I tried to structure it. From that point of view, those 2 chapters about child sexual abuse fitted fairly early in the sort of layering part of the story. So that's why I had sort of put them there. I was looking for you're always looking for like a showstopper end of book. This is, this is what it all means. This is the big story we've been working up to, the kind of bit in the musical where everybody comes back on stage for the final number. And that was Tornado Cash. I just looked at this ongoing cash, huge theft, about this weird video game that was to do with salamanders in the Philippines, and then there's North Korea, and then there's a money laundering thing, and it turns out the money laundering was created by these 3 guys. It was absolutely amazing. So that's why I kind of wanted to finish it. Hindsight's a wonderful thing. It all seemed to make sense in hindsight, but I actually found my notes from the book. I was looking through my files, and there were so many pages of me trying to work out what is the structure here, how to structure this book. I got away with it, I think. There may have been other structures, but I'm fairly satisfied with what we ended up with.
No, it's very good. I sympathize. And the other thing you've done, of course, Jeff, is a book like this can be very dry. It's quite technical. But you've populated it with very interesting people, different emphasis on different people. Do you have any favorites in that mix? I mean, clearly you've spoken to a lot of people, or you've tried to profile different people, tell their individual stories.
The person that really stands out to me is actually an interview called Amin Soleimani, who is one of the people who funded or helped raise funds for Tornado Cash, this online mixer that mixes cryptocurrency up and on the one hand gives privacy, but on the other hand can enable money laundering. It was just really interesting. He had this quite convincing argument. He said, look, if you look at the stuff that's going wrong with humanity at the moment, with some things like climate change, aging population, water crises, resource crises, this is stuff that stretches beyond individual borders and stretches certainly beyond the sort of 4 or 5 year government terms that most governments get in most countries. Our systems of human civilization, society, are generally just not equipped to deal with this stuff. We need something better. That's why he invests in things like Tornado Cash. He believes that this ultra-democratic, devolved, autonomous decision-making structure, which in Tornado Cash was a structure about movements of crypto, but could be a structure about anything, voting, the United Nations resolutions. He believes that genuinely this is the answer to the stuff that's going wrong. And if we can do this, we stand a chance of surviving as humanity. Really interesting argument, actually. Obviously swamped massively by the fact that it was used to launder $500 million for the North Koreans. But at the heart of it, a really interesting issue and quite a big topic. So yeah, I keep coming back to Amin's comments and toying around with them. It's interesting.
Yeah, this is a very interesting interview because it's got these bigger themes beyond the illicit about how tech, a bit where we began, how tech may change the way we live for the better. And again, in the sense, the underside of that, as you say, of the movement of illicit money. Jeff, give us a sense how you work, right? You're a full-time journalist. So you're collecting this material all the time. Some of what you do is actually you were reaching out, and there's some quite neat stories about exposure, maybe too strong, but you sort of exposed what people were doing, and in 1 or 2 cases. So you are in contact with people in the underworld, in inverted commas. What's your process? You file stuff carefully. You sort your material. What you do during the day then feeds into the book?
It's interesting. I've written 3 books now, and each book you learn a bit more, and you just come across this process of writing. And I don't know whether maybe other authors, when they're commissioned to write a book, they look up how to do it, or they have some kind of system, or they develop some kind of system. I did, but very ad hoc as I went along. And so for me, I wrote there's a whole blog on my LinkedIn about this, about how I write a non-fiction book. For me, what's quite important is there's an initial stage where you're just researching, you know kind of what the story is, and you start reading about it. And week 1 is always depressing because you think, well, everybody else has covered this story. There's nowhere to take this. There's no new thing here. Everybody else has done a much better job than I have. But towards the end of that week, you start to kind of realize, oh, nobody's gone this direction. How did that bit work? And you realize that sort of gaps in the story, and you realize that news coverage is fundamentally really bad at telling stories. They will tell you the on-the-day breaking fact, but how we actually got there is completely missing. So then you start to think, okay, I need to go here, I need to go there, I need to interview that person, they've got the key to this story. So you start working out what the dynamics are. And then all the time you're sort of banking all of this material into your sort of research folder. And then there's a certain point, my first book, I did all of that research for the entire book and then tried to write the entire book, which was terrible because I went back 6-8 months to the stuff I was researching and couldn't remember what it meant. So subsequently I've realized I research a chapter and then write it, research a chapter, then write it. And so that's the sort of process as it goes along. And obviously you have to be really, really rigorous about your note keeping, about filing everything away, about labeling everything, because when you come to legaling the book, before you publish it, the lawyers will get in touch and they'll say, well, where did that fact come from? How do you know that? And if you can go back to the lawyer like that and say, this page, this paragraph, that document, A, it's comforting because you know where it is, but B, the lawyers actually like that because like, okay, this person knows what they're talking about. A lot of those legal conversations are actually about trust. Can I trust this author? So again, sort of rigorous note keeping, rigorous sort of filing. Book writing is interesting. I think you need to have two skills that are generally antagonistic. You need to be somebody who can have quite a macro vision and a sort of overview of this and, you know, quite like stories and sort of crafts these big narratives. On the other hand, you need to be extremely detail oriented, at least the sort of stuff that I do. Very, very detail oriented. So you're doing this micro macro picture all the time of zooming out to what's the big picture and then zooming out to where did that individual fact and statistic come from. So it's and that's why a lot of people struggle with writing books, is balancing the two ways of working is quite difficult.
It's very interesting. Jeff, you obviously read a lot in what you are doing. I mean, what's the state of nonfiction in the sector, would you say? Are there areas that can be explored? There's a whole range of new books emerging in this area. Is the ground well covered? I mean, is there areas for new exploration? Certainly. I mean, what do you think of the sort of state of play of the area where you're working?
It's a very good point. There were some excellent, really, really excellent books. I mean, Casey Michael's book was fantastic. Tom Burgess does great stuff. Oliver Bullough also does great stuff. Well, sort of named 3 other sort of, you know, white male authors there, but you know that there's some fantastic sort of work being done around this. But also, I mean, there's some really interesting work being done around podcasts around this. Su-Lin Wong at The Economist has done a podcast called Scam Inc., which is about Southeast Asian scam compounds. She's presented that. I think the producer Sam Roberts on that. And that's really interesting. So it goes into this sort of netherworld. And I think that the struggle we're going to have, I think, with journalism and covering this stuff, is journalism is still trapped in this thing where we want the Mr. Big. It's usually Mr. Big at the top of it. You know, who's the you know, Capo di Capi at the top, the mafia style thing, you know, the kingpin. And again, narratives around documentaries are always after that, you know, who's the brave investigator chasing after the, you know, criminal mastermind. Modern organized crime has shifted, and it shifted in the same way that a lot of the tech sector shifted, to the point where it's about networks working together, which are themselves fairly non-hierarchical. And across the network, it's non-hierarchical. It's quite difficult in some of these organized crime enterprises to work out who's the boss. I mean, I've talked about the North Korean Hush Puppy case. The North Koreans were working with these 2 money launderers. Hush Puppy was one, Big Boss was the other, called himself Big Boss. I'm not sure who was in charge there. I mean, the people who do the crime are reliant on the people who launder the money, but the people who launder the money can't do anything unless the crime. So who's in charge? Well, the answer is they're working together. It's a networked effect. And I worry that as journalism, as media covering it, we're sort of not geared up to cover that, because it's like, well, if there's no big boss at the end of it to pull away the curtain on, what's the sort of point, you know, is what commissioning editors seem to still look to. But also for law enforcement as well, you know, law enforcement is bureaucratic and hierarchical. You know, private sector, you know, in banks, anti-money laundering, anti-fraud teams, hierarchical, bureaucratic. If your adversary is, you know, devolved and networked and fluid and flat pyramid, but you on the other side are differently organized, how effective are you going to be at covering that threat as a journalist, but also at covering it as a defender in a financial institution or a police officer or whatever? So I think that's what if there's a struggle we've got ahead of us, it's like, how can we make those flat, interoperable network stories work as stories?
I mean, I can't resist sort of carrying on this discussion, partly because of the challenges we have. We know which reports of ours are being read. Of course, we're not a journalistic organization, but This idea is like, what is the role of non-fiction books in all of this? This is really a detailed study of one particular phenomena. You make the point, Scam Incorporated, there's podcasts, there's news, there's all sorts of ways in which people get information. Is there still space for a book like this?
Yeah, absolutely. There's space so long as you can make it relatable and make it about people. I think one of the traps that actually a lot of journalists and coverage in general falls into is coming up with a massive number. You know, we believe that this enterprise, this organized crime gang, or this particular crime phenomenon, you know, is responsible for 12 billion worth of losses or whatever. And I think the idea is, oh, the public will take that really seriously. It's a huge number. I think it's the opposite. I think the public really struggle with like a billion. A billion isn't incalculably difficult. I mean, I think we can just about get our heads around a million because you think, well, I earn X amount of money in a year and I would earn that. As soon as you're dealing with amounts of money that someone just could never earn in their lifetime, it disappears off the edge of comprehensibility. So the key for that, I think, is to look for the individual story, trace the individual path, like just get a through thread that follows one person, one victim, one criminal, one enterprise. Just follow that through line. Then you can say, oh, and by the way, actually, this is part of a multi-billion enterprise. But staging it, you know, taking people through the steps and making it relatable and small scale enough that they can do it is something that's a bit counterintuitive for journalists and media who cover this. Like, oh, we have a big story here. It's like, yeah, too big. You know, narrow it down for me. Tell me the, you know, where the rubber hits the road. Anyway, that's what I think.
And you've done that, Jeff, because you've got lots of, I mean, going back to a comment you made before, lots of individual stories woven into this bigger story. I think that's what Rinse does really, really well. So you're being introduced to one character, you're just getting a sense of them, and then somebody else emerges. So it's really very, very well done. Jeff, there's a drawing to a close, but there's an intriguing sentence in the acknowledgements where you say, you at least family and friends who read the book, you haven't named them for their security. And of course that raises the question about your security. Again, on our podcast series, that's been a recurring theme. People working on organized crime often take precautions. They may be threatened when the book comes out. Some people are unhappy. Does the same apply in your sector, more tech? I mean, what precautions do you take? I mean, clearly you went so far as to mention it in your acknowledgements. So just generally your take on the issue of security.
Yeah, it's interesting. Look, to be clear, the kinds of authors that you've interviewed in the series, lots of them are taking way more risks than I am and doing far sort of braver work. I mean, you know, you look at there's Catherine Belton's book about Putin's people. You know, there's a major court case around that, you know, she and publishers had to work on and fight that, you know. And that's a huge drain. I'm a one-person band. I have no legal team behind me. So I had to be quite careful with the subjects that I cover. And look, frankly, most of what I cover, these are cases that have been through the courts and have been judicially disposed. So the threat, the sort of legal threat, is minimized because the person can't sue for libel. It's like, well, you were found guilty of this offense, you know. Good luck getting that through the courts. So, you know, in terms of a legal risk, I try and I'm quite cautious and quite careful about that. And I think there's other journalists who look at that and think, well, you should take bigger risks and should go further. You know, I have to make a careful assessment about that. In terms of the sort of physical and sort of cyber risk, I've been doing this for quite a long time. And interestingly, talking to victims all the time, you do get a sense of what the methodology is. You know, you learn how LinkedIn gets used to sort of lure people in. And there's some things that have come across my radar, emails and messages that I get where I think, are you who you say you are? So if I get a message somebody I don't know, I will Google them. I will go to the website that they claim to, or the organization they claim to work for. I might phone up and say, does this person work for you? You know, you try and take steps like that to protect yourself. Obviously, you know, from a sort of tech side, you know, the various things that I do, you know, using encrypted communication channels and so on, encrypting documents, you know, it's not sort of rocket science. So, you know, on the physical side, I'm quite careful, you know, about my physical address, my home address. That's a sort of red line as to that getting out there. But you know, it's as I say, I feel the risks I'm taking as a journalist are way less than the risks of other authors that you've spoken to and other authors whose books I've read. So I don't feel I'm in the sort of top tier of threats there.
What's next? I mean, you don't need to name exactly, but are you working on another book? I mean, you're still mining the sector?
I am, yeah. I've been mulling doing another book.
Yes, you're a sucker for punishment, clearly, yeah?
I've just had 7 rejections from publishers, so I'm mulling another book, but I'm sort of licking my wounds at the moment. I won't go into the details of why. Maybe I just there's plenty of other stuff going on, and I'm interesting because I cover both cybercrime and financial crime. There's always something moving in one or other of those, so I can kind of toggle back and forth between the two. So maybe the financial crime book didn't work out. Maybe I'll try and do a cybercrime book, but plenty still to go on. I'm not twiddling my thumbs, that's for sure.
Jeff White, the author of Rinsed. Thank you very much, Jeff. That was a fascinating conversation. Like the book, it covered a lot with a couple of golden threads running through it. We are really appreciative for the opportunity to get your insights. So thank you.
Fantastic. Thanks so much for having me. Really enjoyed it.